Land disputes between countries aren't exactly rare. You've got islands, you've got mountain ranges, you've got river deltas. That's a mouthful. It's a piece of desert in northeastern Africa, right near the Red Sea, that is roughly trapezoid-shaped. So what's the deal with this piece of land? Why don't these countries just sort it out? Can you actually legally just claim random chunks of desert? Well, let's get into it. It is about 2,060 square kilometers, or 795 square miles. Similarly, if Sudan wanted to claim Bir Tawil, they would have to redraw their border and give up on claiming the Hala'ib Triangle. I mean, sure, it's mostly desert, but it's also mostly empty. There's no people living there, no towns, no roads, no ports, no borders, no fences, no camels, nothing. Several micronations have attempted to claim the territory as their own, such as the Free Republic of Liberland, the North of South, and the Kingdom of Unclaimed. Internet celebrities like Casey Neistat made videos about how they were gone, move there and build the world's first city in the desert or whatever. Not to mention that even if you did somehow survive in this place, you wouldn't have a government to turn to for help. It's true that the Hala'ib Triangle is rich in resources, but it's not clear that either country would actually benefit more from controlling the Hala'ib Triangle as opposed to Bir Tawil. If we zoom in, you can see that it's largely just desert like Bir Tawil, except it does have this port here, which could potentially be very useful. Egypt, who controls the port, obviously thinks that it's super valuable. But it's not clear that Sudan would actually benefit more from controlling it, because as of right now, there is literally no legal way to claim the place. So really, I think it comes down to the fact that the Hala'ib Triangle and Bir Tawil have been a part of Egyptian and Sudanese identity respectively for too long for them to give it up now. If these two countries can't even agree on what's a desert between them, how can we trust them to peacefully resolve differences over something that they actually care about? Should they ask the UN? Let me know down in the comments below, even if it would objectively make more sense to do so. Also, be sure to follow me on social media, where I share random stuff throughout the week that I do unshare here. I've been your host, and until next time, goodbye. Sort of like how neither Spain nor Portugal wants to admit that they ever agreed to split the world up in the first place. There's even this one guy named Monty Hall who bought a chunk of the desert as a birthday present for his wife. Although technically he didn't buy any land. But wait, if these countries are okay with letting this piece of desert go to waste, why don't they just agree to share it? What would be the harm in that? All he bought was the rights to call himself the governor of a region in this tiny country nobody cares about. There's literally just sand. So as of right now, it's kind of like rock and a hard place situation. Neither country wants to give up on the Hala'ib Triangle for a piece of desert. A good example of this is when Sudan accused an Egyptian tourist of taking a picture of a military base along the disputed border. This led to the closure of the border between the two countries in 2013. For reference, that's roughly the same size as the US state of Connecticut. Also, weirdly, it's exactly the size of Los Angeles. But what if the disputed territory is a piece of land that neither country actually wants? Welcome to my channel. One website describes it as the world's largest uninhabited and uncontacted desert. Another describes it as an uninhabited barren wasteland of sand dunes. And yet another calls it a forgotten desert wilderness. Even if you wanted to set up some sort of colony there, the whole thing is surrounded by extremely inhospitable terrain, surrounded by mountains, meaning that you would have to either bring all your food and water with you or die of starvation and/or dehydration. Nobody really knows who wrote those descriptions, though. I suspect they were just trying to be poetic, but it sounds like a pretty terrible place to live. Instead, it kind of just stops here. There's also this other piece of land called the Hala'ib Triangle, which is quite rich in resources, and which both countries claim. But for simplicity's sake, let's focus on Bir Tawil. And today, we're going to be talking about the weird little desert between two countries that nobody wants. In 1899, Britain, who at the time was still messing around with colonialism, drew an agreement between Egypt and Sudan, setting their border like so. But then, only 3 years later, in 1902, they redrew the border, moving it over here. This created a whole bunch of problems. Imagine if someone drew your bedroom wall in one spot and then later on drew it in another spot. Which wall is the real wall? Are both walls equally real? Or are both walls equally fake? Sorry, getting a bit off topic there. So this place that we're talking about is called Bir Tawil. It lies in between two countries, Egypt and Sudan, and it is completely surrounded by regions that each country claims as their own. To understand the present, we need to go back to the past. But basically, Egypt decided that the 1899 border is the real border, and Sudan decided that the 1902 border is the real border. This means that from Egypt's perspective, Bir Tawil is not part of their territory, whereas from Sudan's perspective, Bir Tawil is part of their territory. But here's where things get complicated. From Egypt's perspective, their 1899 border goes down to the Red Sea, whereas from Sudan's perspective, their 1902 border does not go down to the Red Sea. If Egypt wanted to claim Bir Tawil, then they would have to redraw their border and give up on claiming the Hala'ib Triangle. Not only that, but Bir Tawil isn't even really a desert. There is a small group of nomadic goat herders who might pass through the area every once in a while. But other than that, it's just empty. Because of this, it has become something of an internet meme. And yeah, that last part is the most important part. Nobody cares. One could potentially argue that the herders who pass through the region use the oases found in the mountains to sustain themselves, but that doesn't really count since they're not actually living there. I know I keep saying it because neither Egypt nor Sudan wants to give up the Hala'ib Triangle, but I think that's a bit of an oversimplification. After all, if you look at a map of the Hala'ib Triangle, it's not all that big. And I guess it depends on how much oil you think is under the sand. But realistically, it's probably not enough to justify starting a war with Egypt over it. It's almost as if having a piece of land that you do and really want is better than not having any piece of land at all. Well, it turns out that the mere existence of this disputed territory makes it slightly more difficult for the two countries to peacefully interact with each other, should they flip a coin. But perhaps more importantly, it raises the risk of conflict over something else entirely. Of course, that's just my opinion. What do you think? Should Egypt and Sudan split the difference and claim Bir Tawil together? I hope you enjoyed learning about this weird little desert between two countries that nobody wants. If you did, please consider subscribing. I put out new videos every single week,